Hey, what's going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Quarbit, and on release day, the monuments from Leviathan were really broken. While some of them granted you OP bonuses, some were also just kinda bad. Thankfully, 1.31.1 reworked a lot of these bonuses to make monuments a little bit more balanced, including a dramatic increase to the upgrade cost. So I want to take a look into these changes to figure out which monuments are worth your money and which ones aren't. In the event that the monuments are reworked again, this video may or may not stay relevant, but assuming everything stays the same, let's go ahead and rank the monuments by their usefulness. Of course, if you enjoy the video, then don't forget to subscribe, and leaving a like is, as always, a massive help. Now, for today's video, I've actually gone ahead and made a tier list template, for which the link will be in the description, so if you want to go ahead and make your own tier list of all the monuments, then there it is. But let's not waste any time, and let's get started with the first monument, Alhambra. Alhambra was absolutely broken on launch with 15% admin efficiency at tier 3, and fortunately it's no longer as overpowered with just plus 5% admin efficiency, but obviously a modifier like that is still priceless, so even if it might cost you like 12,500 ducats, it is absolutely worth it, and I would still place Alhambra in the S tier. Keep in mind though, it does require that you have to be a Muslim or a Christian nation in order to make any use of it, but when it comes to those modifiers, it really just can't be beat. Next up, we have the Ambrose Castle, which, to be honest, it really isn't even that great. I can't imagine spending like 12,500 ducats just to get a little bit of local defensiveness in an area, so that one's gonna go straight to the D tier. Next up is the Angkor Wat, which requires you to either be a Dharmic religion or a Buddhist religion, and can grant you a very powerful minus 10% technology cost. The yearly karma decay is nice as well, but honestly, damn, that technology cost is definitely worth it. It might be a little pricey, but let's be honest with each other, you don't really have to take the tier 3 level here because tier 2 gives you the 10% tech cost. That 5% yearly karma decay isn't really worth the extra money, so for that reason I'm actually going to drop Angkor Wat in the A tier. Next up we have the Ait Ben Hado, which to be honest has a weird sort of balancing, because you sort of have to balance the caravan power and trade efficiency, so if you don't make more money from upgrading it than it costs to upgrade, then it's obviously not worth it, and by the time you have enough money to upgrade it, you're probably not going to need like an extra 5% trade efficiency, so for that reason I'm actually just going to drop it into the C tier. Next up we have the Bagan Temples, which are really good. Of course it gives you plus 2% missionary strength and 2 extra missionaries at its max level. Keep in mind though, you do have to be a Buddhist religion in order to use it, so that's a little bit of a drawback, but that's quite the invaluable bonus to your conversion speed, so I think I'm actually going to put this one in the S tier. Next up we have the Baku Ateshka, which requires you and the province to both be Zoroastrian, but if you upgrade it to the max level you'll get 5% discipline, 10% less fire damage received, and 5% more land fire damage applied, which in my opinion are really nice modifiers, and I think it'll see some pretty high use in multiplayer for any Zoroastrian Persias, so because of those combat bonuses I will be putting it in the A tier. Next up is the Borobudur Temple, which requires you to be a Buddhist faith or of Javanese culture. At best, it can give you a little bit of culture conversion cost and an extra promoted culture, which aren't really the most heavily used things in the game, but if someone was trying to go for a one culture attempt, then I suppose this would be pretty useful. But overall, it's not like it's going to be very helpful in most playthroughs, so I'm just going to drop it into the C tier. The Buddha statues are very similar to the Bagan temples, where at most it'll give you some missionary strength and an extra missionary. Now, in this case, it's a little bit less than you'll get from the Bagan temples, but it's quite good. And the fact that it lines up perfectly with having to be a Buddhist faith also works really well, but it's not quite as powerful, so I will be dropping it into the B tier. Next up we have Chichen Itza, which requires you to be in the Mayan culture group. At most it'll give you 20% manpower recovery speed, 50% decreased recruitment time, and 10% decreased infantry cost. Now I think the most powerful of all these modifiers is obviously the manpower recovery speed. It can be pretty useful in the late game if you happen to be fighting a lot of wars all the time, so for that reason I'm going to be putting it in the B tier. Next up is the City of Kami, which requires you to be a pagan religion, and at most it will give you some technology cost and cost to fabricate claims. Now once again, it's one of those monuments that you're really not going to want to upgrade to the max level, because by the time you have enough money to upgrade it, you're not going to really be fabricating claims anymore, you're just going to be using imperialism. But on the bright side, you do get the minus 5% tech cost at level 2, which I think is a pretty good modifier, so for that reason I'm also going to be putting it in the B tier. Next up we have the Cologne Cathedral, which is quite powerful for Christian nations. It rewards you with a variety of bonuses to your faith if you decide to max it out, but overall I'm not exactly sure if those bonuses are worth 12,500 ducats, unless you were for instance playing a theocracy and you're trying to force convert the entire world through war, and maybe then in that case it would actually be worth something. But overall, it's really not that bad, so I'm just going to drop it into the B tier. Hagia Sophia requires you to be Orthodox, Coptic, or Muslim, and it'll give you a variety of bonuses based off of what your faith is. Overall, these bonuses are just sort of okay. I wouldn't exactly prioritize this monument if I had a couple others, but it certainly also wouldn't be my last pick, so I guess I would put it in the C tier. Next up we have the Harmandir Sahib, which is actually extremely powerful if you max it out to its highest level. That minus 15% minimum autonomy in territories is actually a lot more powerful than some people might think, and if you were to stack that with expansion ideas plus that one government reform, you can bring down your minimum autonomy quite drastically in your territories, which means you don't really have to state things nearly as much. So for that reason, I'm actually just going to drop it in the A tier. The Hedalstava Church is pretty alright with its bonuses. It's another one of those where I would argue that you just want to upgrade it to level 2 and you don't really need to upgrade it to level 3, because once you hit level 2 you get that missionary, and after that your modifiers are really not worth the extra like 7,000 ducats. But overall I'd say an extra missionary is quite useful, so I'm going to put it in the B tier. Next up we have the Himeji Castle, which to be honest is like not that great. Again, it's sort of one of the ones that you wouldn't have to upgrade past level 2 because you get the majority of your bonuses then. And sure, some of these modifiers can be a little useful, but I wouldn't exactly put it at the top of my list. In fact, it might actually sort of go towards the bottom, so I'm actually going to put this in the D tier. Next up we have the Inukshuk, which can be kind of powerful, but you have to sort of balance the cost with, you know, how much you're spending on upgrading it with how much you're saving with that 15% cost of advisors. It's not the worst monument on this list, but I wouldn't exactly see it get upgraded past level 2, and the bonuses it provides are kind of specific and not really too purposeful, so I'm just going to put it at the C tier. Jokang Temple is another one of the Buddhist faith monuments, and will give you 2% missionary strength and missionary maintenance cost decrease. It also provides you some religious unity, and now that I'm looking at these monuments in detail, it's sort of clear to me that Paradox really wants us to do a Buddhist one faith. But in any case, I'd say that these modifiers are really quite valuable. If you're trying to go for a one faith, then of course grabbing that missionary strength is vital, and in my opinion it's kinda close to the A tier, but not quite, so I'm just gonna put it in the B tier. Kanba's Athadi Palace can be quite the powerful monument if you upgrade it to its maximum level. You can decide if you really want to leave it at level 2, which is fine by itself, but I think at level 3 getting that extra diplo relation and turning your advisor cost to board-wide instead of just diplomatic can be worth it. Again, you'd have to balance out the cost with how much you spend on it versus how much you're saving, but that diplomatic reputation can be really useful, so I'm actually going to put it in the A tier. The Kiev-Pechersk Lavra requires you to be Orthodox, and of course for the province to also be Orthodox, and when fully upgraded it can give you 1% yearly Patriarch authority and 2 tolerance of the true faith. In my opinion, this is quite the good monument, but if you're going to upgrade it, you can't just stop at level 2, you have to go all the way, because to be honest, stopping at level 2 is just not worth the money. But once you do reach that level 3, you're getting double the yearly Patriarch authority and double the tolerance of the true faith, which obviously are extremely powerful modifiers, so I'm gonna put it in the A tier. Machu Picchu is a little bit of an odd one. The culture has to be Quechua in the province, and you of course also have to be Quechua. But when you upgrade it to its max, it can give you minus 15% idea cost, 10% reform progress growth, and minus 15% cost to promote mercantilism. Now this is quite the unique set of modifiers on a monument. I'm not exactly sure where to put it, but that idea cost and the reform progress growth can be quite powerful, so I think I'm going to put it in the A tier. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus is not the greatest of monuments. If you're going to upgrade it at all, then just go straight to level 3 instead of stopping at 2, because honestly that's not worth the money at all. But once you do reach level 3, you do get minus 5% tech cost. The only problem is how expensive it is to get there, and the other modifiers really aren't the most useful, so I think I'm actually going to put it in the C tier. Mesa Verde is a really powerful monument actually. It requires you to be totemist in order to use it, but if you upgrade it to max, it can give you that minus 10% idea cost and technology cost. which, even if it'll take a while for you to finally upgrade it, will end up saving you a ton of points. Of course, there's also the fact that its tier 1 already gives you minus 5% tech cost, so for that reason alone, I think it's quite useful, and I'm willing to put it even in the S tier. The Easter Island heads, also known as the Moai, used to also be extremely powerful in launch, and it used to give you 65% religious unity, but nowadays it requires you to be Polynesian, and it doesn't grant something nearly as powerful as that, but it's still quite a nice modifier in my opinion. Tolerance of the true faith, tolerance of heretics, and religious unity aren't bad per se, but of course it is rather expensive to upgrade to this point, so I think I'm going to be putting it in the B tier. Next up is Mount Fuji, which requires you to either be Shinto or Theravada. I don't know why you're not allowed to be the other faiths, but whatever. Now, it's really not a good monument, let's be honest with each other. The province modifiers are good for that one province, but unless you're deving Mount Fuji to the sky, I'm not really going to see a point with this. And the area modifiers are kind of lackluster at best. Global modifiers as well are just sort of like, okay, I suppose. And overall, it's not worth spending this many ducats, so for those reasons, I'm just going to drop it in the D tier. The Murud Janjira fort is really powerful actually, because if you upgrade it to max you get 30% force limit modifier, minus 20% naval maintenance modifier, a yearly navy tradition, and minus 10% admiral cost. These are ridiculously good bonuses, especially for multiplayer players. I could definitely see this being used quite heavily. So even if it costs quite a lot to get there, that is a ridiculous amount of naval force limit modifier. So for that reason, I'm actually going to put it in the S tier. The Notre Dame Cathedral is very similar to the Cologne Cathedral, where it gives you a couple of bonuses if you're in the Christian group. These aren't the most powerful bonuses, they're just sort of okay, I suppose. So I'm just going to drop it in the same tier as the actual Cologne Cathedral. Parthenon was another one of those that was ridiculously overpowered, but now you have to be in the pagan religious group, and it no longer gives you that +1 monthly admin. Overall, the modifiers that it gives are sort of not perfect. You'd have to, of course, balance out the advisor cost with how much money you're spending on it. Now, in my opinion, there's not really a reason to upgrade it past level 1 because you get the advisor cost, that's great, but I don't think it's actually worth spending the extra money just to get an extra 10% decreased cost. So it's decent to have at level 1, but nothing above that, so I'm just going to put it in the C tier. Next up we have the Pena Palace, which is a little bit of a weird one. It really just gives mainly area modifiers once you upgrade it. Of course you get a little smidgen of missionary strength, but I don't know if that's worth the extra, 7 grand. And unless you are stacking a ridiculously tall state around it, then that local manpower modifier just really isn't going to be worth that much in the first place. So for those reasons, Pena Palace is going to be going straight to the D tier. Next up we have Petra, which requires you to either be Sunni or Christian, and you have to be Syrian or Bedouin. If you upgrade it to max, then you're going to get 2 Diplo rep, a little bit of envoy travel time, a Diplo relation, and cost to fabricate claims. Now at level 1, I can see that it's, not bad to have for the extra Diplo rep. Level 2, in my opinion, is not worth the cost at all, so if you were going to get level 2, then you may as well keep going to level 3, because then it gives you that extra Diplo rep and an extra Diplo relation. The other 2 modifiers are somewhat useless, but you know what? At least you're going to get something sort of B tier value out of it. Next up we have the Prambanan Temple, which requires you to be one of the Dharmic religions. And this is just an S tier all the way through. It gives you that minus 10% development cost on every province, the 2% missionary strength, and an extra missionary. These are absolutely invaluable modifiers, and I think the MP players are going to absolutely love this one, so we're going to put that straight to the S tier. The Pura Besaki requires you to be in the Dharmic group as well, but it's really not nearly as good as the Prambanan Temple. When fully upgraded, you'll get some loyalty equilibrium for the Brahmins, 15% stability cost modifier, minus 0.05 monthly war exhaustion, and minus 1 national rest. It's not the most useless monument on this list, but it's certainly not the most useful, especially if you consider the 11.5 grand cost to get to that level. But at least at level 1 and 2, it is worth at least something, so I'm going to put it in the C tier. Pyramids of Cheops require you to be pagan and Egyptian, which is kind of a weird combo. Hey there, editing Quarbit here. By the way, that thing that I just said was actually kind of false. You do not need to be both pagan and Egyptian culture in order to make use of the pyramids. It's actually in either or, which I happened to miss when I was reading it. And I make the same mistake later with the Stonehenge, but ultimately, even with these differences, I wouldn't really put them in any other places. But, just wanted to make sure that's clear. If fully upgraded, then it'll make your clergy a little bit happier, your advisors will cost less, and your ideas will also cost less. In my opinion, you wouldn't really want to upgrade it past level 2 unless you are swimming in cash, because that extra little modifier at the end is often not worth it. And because you need to have this weird combination of Egyptian culture and pagan religion, I'm actually just going to drop that in the C tier. The Registan Square requires you to be in the Muslim group, and is actually really quite powerful. If you upgrade it to the max, then you're going to get yourself minus 15% war score cost versus other religions, especially in late game if you're trying to do like a world conquest or take a lot of land. This is invaluable. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in the A tier. St. Peter's Basilica is an okay monument. It's not great, it does require you to be Catholic of course, but if you upgrade it all the way through, then to be honest, it's really not even worth that much. The bonuses you receive are not used all that often and are pretty minimal, which for me at least places St. Peter's Basilica in the D tier. The Sankin Kotai palaces are actually quite powerful because you don't need to be Shinto in order to use them, and on top of that, if you upgrade it to the max, then you get free war taxes for the entire game. And on top of that, you also get minus 20% general cost at maximum, which I know for multiplayer players is quite invaluable because it allows you to hire more generals and thus slacken more often. So for those reasons, I'm actually just going to drop it into the A tier. The Shwedagon Pagoda requires you to be one of the Buddhist faiths, and when I look at these modifiers, I mean honestly they're really just not that good. At least not for the amount of money you're going to have to spend on it. So in my opinion, the Shwedagon Pagoda goes straight to D tier. Stonehenge requires you to be of a pagan religion, and in my opinion it really isn't worth upgrading at all unless you're going straight to level 3, because everything up until getting that missionary strength is just sort of okay and probably not worth that much money. But in the end it does give you plus 1% missionary strength, which is really one of the only things that keeps it from being in the D tier, so we're gonna put it in the C tier. The Taj Mahal requires you to be of a Muslim faith, and to be honest has a weird combination of modifiers. Personally, I wouldn't upgrade it past the first level if I wasn't swimming in cash, because level 2 doesn't really give you that much of an improvement, and level 3 just gives you some power projection from insults, which is really weird. And at this point, if you have enough money to upgrade it, you're also pretty likely to not have that many rivals left. So with that weird sort of combination of modifiers, it's just sort of like a prestige monument and not really much else. So I'm just going to put it in the D tier. Next, the Temple of Confucius obviously requires you to be Confucian, and when fully upgraded gives you some really nice modifiers. The yearly harmony increase and plus 50% religious unity are extremely helpful for Confucian nations, so for that reason I'm going to be putting it in the A tier. Tenochtitlan requires you to be in the Central American culture group, and is a little bit of a weird monument in my opinion, because it was really just a really big city. So obviously it'll reflect that by giving you some local construction cost and development cost, but in my opinion it's not really worth spending all of that money on it. Sure, you might get minus 15% local construction cost, but at the same time you just spent like an extra 10,000 ducats. So you're really not saving that much money. I suppose the local development cost is okay, but again it's all about, you know, the fact that you're going to be in late game when you build these things, and at that point you're not really going to be developing as much as you're going to be conquering. So for that reason, I'm actually going to be putting Tenochtitlan in the D tier. The Forbidden City is pretty obviously meant for the Empire of China. It requires you to be Confucian, and it will give you some extra yearly absolutism and mandate growth modifier. Now, I don't often play with the Empire of China mechanics, I just don't really like them, so I'm not exactly sure how much that mandate growth modifier is worth it. I'm pretty sure that 0.02 extra per month is not exactly worth 7,000 ducats though. So in my opinion, you just keep it at level 2 because it gives you that yearly absolutism. So in my opinion, the Forbidden City goes all the way to B tier. The Grand Palace of Bangkok is like the Forbidden City, except if it was like significantly better, because it doesn't require you to be Confucian, and it actually gives you even more yearly absolutism, but on top of that it gives you aggressive expansion impact decrease, and 15% governing capacity modifier. Obviously this one will go straight to the S tier because it gives you +1 yearly absolutism, and 15% governing capacity modifier. Next up, we have the Great Wall of China, which requires you to be in the Chinese culture group or to have accepted that culture. Now, at first, the Great Wall of China doesn't seem like it's really that great. Of course, it just gives you some garrison size and a little bit of local defensiveness, but the attrition for enemies can be worth something, I guess. But overall, it's not really that great, so personally, I'm just going to drop it in the D tier. The Kremlin requires you to be in the East Slavic culture group, and when fully upgraded can give you local manpower modifier, a bit of local defensiveness, and a little bit of regiment cost. Overall, it's not really that great of a monument, so just like most of the other local defensiveness monuments, I'm probably just going to drop it in the D tier because that is obviously a really, really expensive additional local defensiveness that really isn't worth the cost. Next up, we have the Tower of London, which I would almost immediately put in the exact same group. Now, it requires you to be or to accept Norman or English culture, and it's another one of those things that really just gives you local defensiveness, but on the bright side, it also does give you yearly army tradition, which saves it from being completely in the D tier, and instead it'll just go straight to the C tier. And the next one, which will be the last monument, is Versailles, which of course requires you to be or to accept a French culture. Now, this one's a little bit weird in my opinion because it gives you national tax modifier, but you're also spending so much money on it that I'm pretty sure that modifier may as well just not be there. It does give you improved relations, which is pretty decent, but in my opinion, if you were to upgrade it at all past level 1, you wouldn't really go past level 2 because ultimately what you're getting is very minimal. Level 1 is decent though because that 10% improved relations can help to tick down your aggressive expansion slightly faster, so it doesn't go straight to the D tier, but I guess sort of towards the C tier. And then finally we have the canals, which in this case will just represent every single canal because they have the exact same modifiers. Now the canals will work the exact same as they did before, where you just build them through your decisions, and they'll cost the exact same. The only difference is that they will actually build a great project in that province now, and that great project honestly doesn't really give you that much. You start off with 1% global trade power and 10 local trade power, which overall isn't that bad, but if you consider the fact that as you continue to upgrade it, it costs more and more, even if at the end you get 50 local trade power and 5% global trade power, you've already spent so much money upgrading it that you're pretty likely to not make back what you just spent. Though it is the only great project which doesn't require you to upgrade it to give you some sort of bonus, but I mean yeah, ultimately for these modifiers you're really not going to get as much money as you're going to sink into this whole project, so I'm just going to drop it in the D tier. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, that is every single monument in 1.31 sorted into a 5-tiered tier list. I might review this and change it to be 6 tiers or maybe even 7 tiers if you guys would prefer that, but I think this is a pretty fair estimate of how valuable each of these monuments are. I really hope these things aren't changed because if they are, then this video will immediately become irrelevant. So I hope you enjoyed the video. This is Quarbit signing off, and as always, have a fantastic day. And just at the end of the video, I would like to give a massive thank you to all of the wonderful people over at Patreon for the month of May. Starting in the general tier, we have Quiet Guy, Brennan Arsenault, Ben Greenhagen, Torvald, Dire Avenger, and Farron. In the Prince tier, we have Snowraven, Rockbox 2020, Robert Kaleno, and Bouncer Steve. In the King tier, we have Chewy Shoot and Natsuki. In the Elector tier, we have TFLJ Martis. And in the Conqueror of Worlds tier, we have The Watcher. Thank you guys so much for your pledges this month, it means a lot to me, and I truly just cannot thank you enough.